All right. Hello. It is me, Stephen Indrisano. I am going to be talking a little bit about my show, Shelterwood, a Suburban Gothic. And this is structured to be a from the beginning. Hello, Rook. Good to see you. Hi, everyone. Shelterwood. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here today. Um, this show has been just everything to me for a very long time. And oh my God, Phoenix, my man. Okay. I had this whole plan. I was going to have a very polished presentation. It was going to be like a TED talk up in here. But alas, life happened a lot this week. So instead, I want to encourage everyone to think of this as just kind of a structured hangout, a chat of sorts. Um, and we're going to go through what this show is. I'll pitch it first. For those of you who don't know, Shelterwood, a Suburban Gothic is a docu-horror. It's in the style of investigative podcasts, but is itself a Gothic horror piece. It follows Nicholas DeRosso on his quest to find his long-lost sister Sadie in an infinite suburb beyond time and space. False true crime. That's right. Where all of your dreams come true. And so from that seed came this incredible show that has been an absolute blessing to work on. As of this chat, we are almost done with the first season. We're about 3/4 of the way there. And I'm going to show you how we got there. So without any further ado, this is our agenda. I'll wait for it to pop up. Hello. We have 4 parts. I'll talk about the writing, the pre-production, the actual production of it, and then how release has gone. But actually what we're talking about is some lessons that I've learned. Number 1, make stuff to live. Number 2, you are not a genius. Number 3, have fun and scream a lot. And 4, it never ends. Those are the 4 lessons that I've learned from this podcast so far, and I'm sure there will be many to come. So without any further ado, let's talk about writing Shelterwood. Now, these are some pictures that Google suggested I use with this slideshow for those of you who are listening afterwards and couldn't make it live. We've got like 2 tech bro looking guys in the upper left. We've got like a busy office workplace on the bottom with like a computer projecting graphs and stuff. This was all too funny for me to leave out, so I had to leave them in. Moving on. Writing Shelterwood. So this show has taken Severance Core. Yes, very true. Roughly 2 years to write the first season of. The first draft I haven't talked about a lot, but I'm kind of referring to it as exploration because I didn't have the shape of the plot. I didn't have any major characters. All I knew was that I was compelled by the idea of wandering around the suburbs at night. This is something that I do a lot of. It's a real cornerstone of my mental health. And there's something kind of unnerving about it, being in these places that are everyone's kind of tucked up inside at night. So the first thing that happened in the writing process is I would literally just take my phone out as I was on walks and I would pretend to see something scary in the suburbs and I would describe what I was imagining. And I had those recordings kind of tucked away and I thought, okay, maybe this will be like a semi-improvised thing. And after a couple of attempts at this, I realized that I didn't have enough control over the actual structure of it. So that led us to draft 1, which is where all of the most recognizable stuff happened. We have the characters that have names and take shape. We have the plot of it. The actual arc was plotted out. I knew what I wanted the beginning to be. I knew what I wanted the end to be. I really wasn't sure about the middle. And I kind of found my way to the middle through writing, in this case, chronologically. Now, I've done a lot of writing since then. And for this particular show, I needed it to be chronological. The way that Nick DeRosso as a character changes over the course of the show, I realized that in order to get him where I wanted him to end up, I needed to kind of batter and bruise him over time. So every episode, it was kind of like a how much more messed up can I make this character every episode, culminating in something that you as an audience have not seen yet, but is a culmination. That was the first draft. I thought that the show would be about episodes long, and it turned into 16. So it was twice as long as I thought it would be in my head. And there was a lot that was cut as well. So we, we had a really pretty rough first draft. Draft number 2 is what the refinement process was. Now, this took probably about a year in and of itself. So once I had the whole script and I had the plot, time dilation, that's right. Everything is thematic. We'll come to that understanding. The show worked, but it wasn't good. So what I ended up doing, and what I highly recommend for anyone who is doing episodic writing, is I printed the whole sucker out, 260 odd pages, and I just kind of splayed it out on the floor, and I tried to figure out if all of the pieces were where they wanted to be. And that was really helpful, because if you listen to true crime and if you listen to investigative podcasts, you'll notice that there's a lot of scaffolding behind the actual show that is taking non-linear things that happen and turning them into a coherent story. And so that kind of became what Draft 2 was about. The other thing that happens in Draft 2 that is super important is that you identify themes in the work and you draw them out. So themes for this season were fire, music, doppelgangers and doubles. These were all themes that were in there already, in the kind of primordial ooze of the first draft, and then finding ways to make them more explicit, call attention to them, kind of massage them into shape. That's what Draft 2 is for, is to make it all seem like one beautiful thing that you made and not 270 individual pages of things that you fought for, which is what writing is. That took, I don't know, a good couple months, maybe a year. Almost about half of this, I would say, was in Draft 2 and beyond. And then draft number 3 is when you put the shine on it. Draft 3, you're like, okay, now you can care about the specific grammar of your sentences. You can care about, is this metaphor doing what I wanted to do? Do these characters sound sufficiently different? These things that are important for audio mediums, like, this is also where I tended to get into, like, are there any conflicts in the chronology of it? Do characters know things they shouldn't know? That was all Draft 3 for me. Some people, that's a much earlier process. I am not someone who tends to care about plot holes myself. I rely on my readers, my beta readers, to care about those things for me. So those tended to come later. I'd be like, yeah. I'll figure out the logic later. We'll start with the fun stuff. So that was writing Shelterwood. But actually, I made this to survive. So what you're looking at here is a picture of a building in Glen Echo Park, Maryland. Now that location made it onto the show because it's somewhere that I went repeatedly throughout my life when I needed to go somewhere else. This is a picture of a building called the Crystal Pool. Glen Echo Park was an actual theme park before it shut down during the civil rights movement because the owner was so racist that he would rather it rot than have non-white people there. It is now owned by the National Park Service and has been spruced up into a beautiful place where you can get married and do art classes, but there are still these things inside of it that are rotting and falling apart. And one of them is the Crystal Pool, which for a long time just said cry. Like, cry was the only thing that lit up on this sign. And there was just something about that. I started writing this in 2020. So deep COVID. I had to move back in with my parents. I had been working in theater at the time in DC, and there was no theater to work in. So I spent a lot of time wandering around my neighborhood in the deep suburbs of Maryland, um, just trying to make sense of my life. And what I inevitably ended up doing was I wrote something scary. And I highly recommend this as a strategy. um, the topic is personal. The character arcs are personal. There isn't a single character in this show that doesn't have a part of me within it, including the monsters, right? And I think that that's one of the coolest things about writing horror, and specifically about writing gothic horror, which is so much about emotions. Um, I I think that it reveals things to you that you wouldn't have otherwise known. Now, the other thing that I did during this was I organized a writers group, which is known only in my heart as the Gay Writers Fight Club. It's just a couple of us, mostly people that I met in podcasting, a couple of people that I met at the University of Vermont when I was going there to get my theater degree. And we have met about once a month for years. And it started because I needed people to help kind of move this project along, and to have people in my life that could see what I was doing and tell me that it was not garbage. That's really important. Like, I don't think you should share everything with everyone immediately, but it's really important to have people in your life who you can go to and say, this is important to me. Does it suck? One of those people is actually in the audience tonight. Hi, Phoenix. Really good to see you. I ran a show with Phoenix for years that was a Stephen King fan cast called the Stephen King Boo Club. It is still up, rotting like the Crystal Pool in Glen Echo, Maryland, just out there somewhere in the digital ether. So this was kind of my big lesson from the writing process, was that it actually did help me cope with some things in my life. It really did help me think about my relationship with people that you lose over the course of your life. It's like anything spiritual, it is hard to describe in a way that doesn't sound kind of silly. But there is something to writing out the questions that you have and trying to find your way to answers. I highly recommend it. That was the writing process for season 1. Let's talk about pre-production, baby. This was the time where you gather your team, you cast the show, you get your sound team together, you budget, you make 20,000 spreadsheets. When I did Shelterwood, I decided that I wanted to cast the show first, get my team together first, and then figure out the budget from there. So what I did was I went through the script and I made a massive spreadsheet of every single character. This would have been really smart to have like a picture of on screen. I am now realizing, but it is too late. So here we are. Imagine a spreadsheet. You've done it. We went through that. At this point, it was just me. Went through that and tallied everything up and said, okay, if we pay everyone $2 per line or $3 per line, what does that break out to? I know that I want to try to pay my production people this much. We're going to need to budget this much for transcripts, all of that stuff. And from there, we came up with a number for our crowd funds. We said, okay, we want to make it for this much. That means we're going to need this much money. Now, I did not have money to put into it. Aforementioned not being employed and whatnot. Give it up for transcripts. Woo! Transcripts in the audience. Give me 1 second to drink some water. Give it up for hydration, folks. Here's the thing. I made some mistakes with this process. Believe it or not, it is too much work for one person to do. This may be shocking to you. It was shocking to me. There's not enough hours in the day, and even if there were, you're not a genius. You cannot do this on your own. So there's a picture of a generic chart that says hospital here. I'd started all these grand plans. I had made up my mind I was going to crowdfund this thing. We wanted to raise $35,000, I believe. And I set the date, July, 4th of July. It's thematic. We'll do like a weird Americana thing. It's the perfect time for branding. I had put all of my mental effort into this. I thought, if I manifest it, I can make it come true. And then in March, my fiance ruptured her Achilles tendon. This is gross. In an injury that the surgeon described as spaghetti-like, because the ends of her tendons pulled apart like spaghetti. Absolutely horrifying. This is true. One of the nurses at the hospital told my then fiance, now wife, that it was her nightmare injury. That of all the things this nurse has seen, Achilles rupture is like one of the worst. You can't use your leg for months and months and months. You're in a lot of pain during it. You need a lot of PT after you're out of your boot and the whole nine. It's just a miserable process. And I care a lot about this person. So suddenly I went from somewhat employed and at school to be in a new career to suddenly at school being in like a part-time minimum wage job and caring for my fiance. And I just want to make it clear, your plans as a creator should account for terrible things happening because you're not a genius. If something bad happens, it's going to impact how much you can put into your project. But at the time, I was operating off of a fair amount of ego and a lot of inexperience, so I decided, I'm going to stay the course. I've decided on this. I put in the effort. How hard could it be to raise $35,000? So I started the crowdfund. Pain, anguish, awful. One of the worst time periods of my life, and I've gone through actual traumas. It is astounding how quickly it drains the joy from a project to assign a numerical value to it. Okay, I'm getting news. Crowdfund was $26,000 from my sound designer. Thank you. Shout outs to Brad. It felt like 36 because at a certain point it became clear that it was fully out of reach. Now, there's a couple of things that led to that. Twitter exploded just around that time. We had designed our entire campaign to kind of catch wind on Twitter, and then Twitter died. It was a really hard time for anyone to be spending money. We weren't that far out of like the main portion of lockdown. And we were an unknown property with a relatively untested producer. Now, at this point, I had worked on Re-Dracula, which I think did help, but it's very different to go from a piece that was really carried on the wind by the viral success of a different project, so Re-Dracula, very obviously inspired by Dracula Daily, to an original piece. We did not raise nearly enough money. And if I could do it all over again, the number one thing I would do the second that I decided to do a crowdfund was find like 12 people that I loved and trusted and say, like, figure out with me, please, how to make this not ruin my life. Because the process of crowdfunding, because we did not raise enough money, stretched from what was supposed to be a 1-month period to a 2-month period, during which time I was supposed to be helping my wife plan our wedding. And I did not do a very good job of that. I am ashamed to admit, and here on the record for my wife, I'll say, like, I overcommitted really hard. And it's because on some level, I thought of this, of Shelterwood, as my project. And I want to encourage you, if you make anything, that is not your thing. That is the world's thing. You're not a genius, and therefore, you should probably bring some people on to help. I had some help, and I had a lot of people volunteering to do as much as they could. We had an incredible crew of people that were, helping us reblog things, that were making art for us, that were boosting as much as they could. But ultimately, some stuff is out of your hands. Miracles, however, do sometimes happen. I had fostered a work relationship and friendship and just kind of general, you know how like artists like flirt with each other professionally. Um, uh, Pacific Obadiah from Bloody FM had been following progress on this for quite some time. And when it became clear that I was going to try to make the show on the tightest of shoestring budgets, no matter what happened, we had a very long conversation about what the show needed and what it would take to actually make it. They pulled hard for me. They pitched my show for me to this network. And that's the only reason that this is happening. And it doesn't have to be one dude at one network, right? It's about opening yourself up to the possibility that it's going to take a lot more than you. And there are some shows, I will say, there are some shows that are made entirely by one person. And those people, I don't understand them. I don't know how they do that. And the vast majority of art is made by a huge community of people, whether or not that community gets to put their name on the finished product. I would also be remiss not to mention Cam Collins of the Old Gods of Appalachia, who donated $1,000 to help make the show. That's a huge amount, and it's a huge proportion of the budget. And also my good friend, Phoenix Crockett, who is in the audience tonight, who threw parties repeatedly to raise money for this show. They're both shouted out in the credits of every episode for that reason. This show would not exist without them. Top to bottom, it would not. You're not a genius, and that's okay. Make your art with other people by any means necessary. Let's talk about production. So this is the part of the presentation where we're going to get into a little bit of nitty gritty. So I've made a 4-part Venn diagram here. The intersection of spreadsheets, emails, artistry, and play, that is podcast production. If you're wondering, there's a lot of other intersections. The intersection of artistry, play, and spreadsheets is business LARP. Dracula Daily is artistry, play, and emails, but not spreadsheets. It becomes Re-Dracula when you add spreadsheets, because then you're back into podcast production. Now, we're gonna get technical with it, because this is an audio drama convention, and I do want to actually kind of give some serviceable advice to people out there who might want to make their own show. If you are making a show with more than one actor, there are 2 ways to do that. You can either jump on the computer at the same time or meet in the same room at the same time, and you can go together. That's called synchronous, because you're on the same timeline. If you can't schedule that out, Lord knows most of the time I can't, you're going to do what's called asynchronous. So that means that everyone does their own lines together, and then someone else stitches it up at the end. Pros and cons to all of these. Synchronous recording is great because it allows you to improvise. When we were recording, characters that Nick was supposed to be close with would record synchronously, because it was important that you catch those micro interactions between actors. Characters where Nick could afford to be a little more separate from, those were asynchronous. There's going to be some mild spoilers here for the show, nothing major, but Officer Smiles, who was the balloon cop, was not synchronous, because that's like a monster character, whereas a lot of the other kind of sympathetic characters in Shelterwood, those were synchronous. Those were times where we were all in together. We have some dedicated haters in the audience for Officer Smiles. Hydration break. So I have heard people say that film is an editor's medium. And I would like to argue that so too are podcasts. And specifically, podcasting is such an intensive medium for sound design and the dialogue editing process. When you are restricted to what you have with your ears, you can't fill in any blanks. And so small differences in timing become exaggerated. There's a huge difference between two characters walking into a room and saying, hey, hey, and hey, hey. Those are two very different things. Same performances, just these differences in timing make all the difference. And so if you yourself do not yet have the skill of editing, because it is a craft, it takes a lot of practice, I would really recommend recording some stuff. Doesn't have to be complicated. It can just be a monologue that you made. It could be you get a couple of friends together in a room and play some amateur D&D. D&D podcast sound editing is like boot camp. I did hours and hours and hours of dialogue editing for a show called Worst Movies Ever Played. And it's really hard because you're messing with story anytime you move someone's voice around. Do that. Find someone to do that with if you want to be a sound person. I don't do a lot of sound work on this show, but the background of having it is essential because at this point, I want to talk a little bit about what our actual production flow is. So we would record in batches of 4 where we would have all of the scripts together and we would decide if they're synchronous or asynchronous. My directors had their marching orders on which episodes they would do. Some were together, some were separate. And 4 at a time, because it's a 16 episode arc, we would make sure we had all the lines hunted down. We would get those together and ready for the sound team before moving on. Team sound consisted of Sam Stark, who is also Solomon Crockett on the show. They would do a first pass of the dialogue cut. It would then go to me. I will do kind of small changes. So if I feel like, okay, this scene, we have, what was with that echo? Oh gosh. All right. I must be dealing with a doppelganger, as is thematic, which means it's time for a hydration break. Okay, I'm getting word that it was brief. Hopefully it did not show up in the recording. We take that cut where it has gone for the first time, and then I kind of do some fine refinements. I might put in some production elements. I'm usually the person who does the last time on montage because I'm kind of deciding from a story element who's doing what. And then that gets sent to our sound designer, Brad Colebrook. Now, Brad, I hired specifically. There are a couple of people that I hired very specifically, and Brad was one of them. I adore their work. And they have a very specific way that they prefer to do sound design, which I think is really cool. Not always feasible from a scheduling perspective, but I like it when it works, where rather than sending a whole file, what they like to do is they like to sit with you and they stream their work. And then that way, if you're listening through and you say, that music's not quite right, or, you know, I know that he threw a clock across the room, but like it needs more high up twinkly bits and less low down thumpy bits. Instead of having to take those directions, interpret them, try again, and then re-export the whole thing and send it to you, that system allows you to sit down together and have it be a collaborative process, which was really helpful at a couple of key moments in Shelterwood, especially with music, because music is so vibes based that if Brad had all of their options that were in the sound packs they like, yeah, so Brad's in the audience. Quoth, I will not sit through 10 files of let's change this timing just a little bit again. Because again, you're wasting time at that point. So we've kind of settled into a middle ground at this point, but the short and narrow of it is once it's in that testing process, typically as the showrunner / creator, I kind of have last go ahead on the vibes of it. And then it goes to get put into whatever, in our case, Megaphone, but whatever podcatcher or distribution you're using. Also really important that I want to mention in here, advertising. And I don't just mean like, look, I'm with you. I hate advertising. And I don't just mean like, if I see the Charmin bears one more time, I'm going to explode. I mean, like the act of advertising is really hard. And so the advice I want to give on this is that as you're ramping up to release your podcast, which is really what I mean in this section, it is contingent upon you to know why people should care. And once you know why people should care, you can kind of work your way around that. So what that looked like for Shelterwood was I wrote a bunch of small things for other shows that I thought would be a good fit. So there's an SCP Archives crossover, there's an Overbrook crossover, there's Someone Dies in This Elevator crossover. These are all shows that kind of are adjacent to, and I was doing a lot of free labor for them, right? Like, it's hard to write things. So I was doing something, and in return, and these were, by the way, creators that I had previous relationships, right? So you'll have really, your mileage may vary if you cold call for this kind of thing. But when you can collaborate with people that you respect and whose work is similar to yours in some way, that's a really strong way of advertising because you get to make art. The best advertising should represent your brand, not in like a gross, like everyone should know the McDonald's jingle way, but in a everyone should know what you're about kind of way. So I think the best advertising that I've done for Shelterwood, aside from in podcasting, has actually been the Tumblr. Is mostly a haunted house aesthetic kind of blog. And that's okay, because we've gotten people, we've seen tags that say, I followed this account for the aesthetic, and then I listened to one of the episodes, and I was really into it. And that makes sense, because the target demographic for a show like ours is people that willingly seek out pictures of decrepit buildings just to entertain themselves. You gather everyone in one place, and then you mention to that place, hey, we also have a show if you want. That's one way of advertising that I've found successful because I love curating an aesthetic. For you, it might be something different. For you, it might be, I'm on Reddit a bunch and I'm commenting a lot and I'm sharing my opinion. And so you have a community. That's a different kind of advertising. It shouldn't make you feel gross, but it's always going to feel a little weird to say, my work is worth listening to. That bit kind of never goes away, and you just have to be okay with it. So that's production. But really, come on. Fun, right? Like, this is the fun part. The writing is hard. The production, the spreadsheets, I mean, the crowdfund almost killed me, like the whole nine. This should be fun. This is a picture of a park near my apartment called Wolf Trap, and Wolf Trap is the only national park for the performing arts. I love national parks. I don't know if you can tell. This is an outdoor theater in the woods, and I love it because the backdrop just is the woods. And that's the spirit that I want you to take with your art. If you are going to follow my advice and to follow the most successful bits of Shelterwood, it's always the joy. There's a moment in every single episode when Brad sends me a finished draft of something and I laugh out loud and clap my hands like a toddler because that's the thing. Whatever that is, whatever is bringing you joy, that's the beating heart of your project. And if you find yourself in the middle of production and you're just miserable, then that's a sign that you need to change something. It could be the production itself. So I brought on another producer early on. It was just going to be Emma Puranen, who is incredible. But I realized that the production was making me miserable. So I brought on Hannah Wright, who is also an incredible producer and a good friend of mine. And that made it so much better. And I enjoyed it so much more. And that meant that I had more to give it. Another piece of advice, if you're like me, I'm a perfectionist. And eventually you have to stop critiquing. You start to make things because you have a sense of taste for it. This is something Ira Glass has talked about. But your taste and your ability will not match for a very, very long time, if ever. And so you have to kind of know when it's time to put the brush down. And this is very true with audio because it's all pretty subjective. At a certain point, allow yourself to stop criticizing your work, bask in what you like about it, and then share that with the world. Production. So let's talk about release. We are still releasing. Oh, that's really funny. I accidentally left company name and roadmap on this slide. This has been company name. I hope that you enjoy it. Engage the audience, obviously. Continue advertising. Advertising is just like not just leading up to a crowdfund or whatever. It's the continual reminding of a group of people that they like your stuff. Celebrate victories. I mean, like every comment that you get that makes you happy, don't obsess over them, because if it's the only thing you're getting out of it, you'll deflate like a balloon when you get negative comments. But, allow yourself to be a little proud of it and keep pushing, especially if you're still producing the show. We started with a good 2-month head start, and we are out of head start. We are like officially producing the show in real time, laying the tracks down in front of the train. Brad suggests, again, my wonderful sound designer, that you do the whole thing before you release, and I officially agree with them. It's too much stress. It gets in the way of the fun. And your audience will be there. Your show will still be relevant, whether it's 1 day from now or 3 years from now, because it's art. I know the audience has pointed out that I continue to make balloon references. It's just how my brain works, and I'm sorry. But of course, the real thing with production and then releasing it out into the world is that there will always be more. If you have made a story, you have the capacity to make a story. So this picture, I put a picture of a bear up on top of a mountain because one of my favorite songs as an annoying young kid was The Bear Went Over the Mountain. It goes a little something like this. The bear went over the mountain, the bear went over the mountain, the bear went over the mountain, and what do you think he saw? What do you think he saw? What do you think he saw? The bear went over the mountain, and what do you think he saw? Another mountain. And then you sing that until someone tries to strangle you to death. That's what art is. You're a bear going over mountains. I discovered, so Shelterwood was always supposed to be an 8-episode contained arc. It became a 16-episode contained arc. And then as I was producing it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And it wasn't just because it was consuming my life, it's that there were things that kept coming up in my brain. There were characters that I couldn't ignore and situations that were too interesting. And so I kept writing it. And now there's, I have like 8 episodes written for a season 2 that was never supposed to exist in the first place. But I got to the top of the mountain and discovered, oh God, there's another mountain and maybe another one beyond that. Because that's just what creativity is, right? Like you find your way to a release of some sort, whether that's a personal release, a poem that you share with 3 people, or a massive release like something like this, where you're putting out for the whole world. And that release is only as important as it getting you to the next thing that you're going to do. Even the parts that suck teach you things. Especially the parts that suck teach you things. I mean, I'm a different person now because I made this show. If I did not make this show, including the parts that were really hard, put stress on my body, on my relationships, if I did not go through those things, I would be a less well-rounded, less interesting, less artistically fulfilled person. And if you can, in your moments of dread and sorrow that are caused by making things, these birthing pains that all creatives go through, try to remember in those moments that they are tools for the next time. Because it's not just the show you make, it's the life you live. Life is itself a creative act, and it never ends. I want to end with this quote by David Lynch, talking about his painting. So David Lynch is known primarily as a movie director. I cried like a baby when he died, which was recently, as of this presentation. And a lot of what I love about his work is that it taps into something deep. And that's important to me. And so I'm just going to read this quote. I knew my stuff sucked, but I needed to burn through. I needed to find what was mine. And the only way to find it is to just keep painting and to keep painting and see if you catch something. And so that is my advice to everyone here, whether you are an experienced artist who does many things that you love, or if you're someone who's just thinking of maybe dipping their toes in, sending in a few auditions, writing a scene or 2. My advice is to keep painting. See if you catch something. That is the presentation as it was. I hope you enjoyed. I just dissociated for like 45 minutes. We're open for Q&A. I'm going to be keeping an eye on my DMs from the organizers. I think that they have some sort of Q&A link. I'm getting applause from chat. Thank you, chat. Thank you for being here, everyone who is here live. I greatly appreciate it. It was a really tough week for me personally, and nothing lifts my spirits faster than getting to talk about creation. Creation is what I do it for. And yeah, that's my show. I think if you want to listen to it, and I hope you will, Shelterwood, a Suburban Gothic, is available anywhere podcasts are found, except for YouTube. We are still working on that. You can find us at bit.ly/shelterwoodpod, all lowercase, on Tumblr at shelterwoodpod, and on Instagram at shelterwoodpod. We're all over the place. I had a really wonderful time being here, and I hope that you enjoyed yourself too. And now we're open for questions. While I hydrate. If we don't have questions, I can also ramble too. I know this was like an hour-long slot, so I got more shit that I could just say. Yes. What's my advice for new creators? That's a great question. I think because it's asked so frequently, new creators are a really beautiful, special beast. It's like when you see a toddler drawing something and you ask what it is and you expect them to say like a house, but they say like it's robot dinosaur number 18. And you're like, great. I love that. If you're a new creator, I want you to pay attention to the things that are hard in a good way and the things that are hard in a bad way. That's going to help you figure out what your specific niche is. So for me, I learned over time that sound design, hard in a bad way. Dialogue editing, hard in a good way. Production, hard in a bad way. Acting, hard in a good way. And so that's kind of what I want you to do is as you're figuring out what you do, listen to that, right? Because that's going to be the internal motivation you need to get through the hardest part of being a new creator, which is knowing that you're a new creator and knowing that the work you make is probably going to sound like the thing a new creator makes. The rest of it will come. Just keep doing it. Thank you for the question. How do you tell what's good hard and bad hard? Okay. So I a little background about me. I've done a lot of therapy in my life. I highly recommend it. A good way to tell is whether you end your session feeling satisfied or feeling defeated. So if I write and I force myself to write, sometimes the writing is bad and I know it's bad, but there's still a part of me that's really proud for having written at all. Also how hard it is to get into, like for me as someone with like executive dysfunction, if something holds my attention for a really long time, I'll know that it's probably a good fit. Anything that you itch to do during other tasks is a really good sign. So for me, I get what's called story brain in my house where I'll just like, I will not be there at the end of the conversation because I'm thinking about a story that I want to write right now. So those are things for me. Another thing is like, is it something that you want to tell other people about and not in a venting way, but in like I had this cool experience way? That's always one way to know. And then, I would also say like, trust your own judgment. Because what you feel internally, what I feel internally may well be different, and that's okay too. Okay. Phoenix asks $1 million and you have to make an entirely new, unrelated to this audio drama. What's the premise? Okay. So my dream project, I guess it's not entirely unrelated to this premise because it's the same kind of framing device, but I've always wanted to do an audio drama docu-horror take on Carrie. That's not nearly enough money to get the licensing for Carrie, but if you read the original novel, it takes the place of a series of vignettes interspersed by a hearing on what happened in this town, and that's a perfect framing device for audio. So I would love to make like a really high budget, incredibly polished, well done Carrie adaptation. Um, yeah, I mean, that's really kind of the big one. I also, this is unrelated to podcasting in general, but I've been obsessed for a long time about like doing a 4-show all drag performer season of like a bunch of theater shows. So I'd love to see like, and most of these shows you couldn't do this legally because they have like copyright issues with the gender of their performers, which is not ideal. Okay, we've just checked. The licensing is $390,000 for Carrie, so it's doable. Someone give me $1 million and I'll do it. Spring Awakening, I think, would be a great show in drag. Actually, Carrie the Musical would be a great show in drag. I think Death of the Salesman would be a great show in drag, and 12 Angry Men would be a great show in drag, just like a real powerhouse. That would actually probably be more expensive than the podcast because the theater's expensive as hell. But yeah, that's my dream projects. Those are some of my faves. Yeah. God, that just spilled out of me. 12 we got we've got hype for 12 Angry Men in drag. Absolutely. And I did not expect this to be such a pro 12 Angry Men chat here tonight. Delightful. Fantastic. Let's see if I have any other. I'm going to pop over as well to my DMs and see if I have any questions coming in from our organizer. Okay, and I'm being told that my slot ends at the end of the hour, which is coming up soon, but I can go over by a bit if I'd like. So if we have more questions or more conversation, we'll just kind of keep rolling for a bit to fill up more time. Okay, not directly about the show, but the quote about continuing to make stuff, even if it's bad, reminded me of the Moturn method. Have I heard of Matt Farley? He does, oh my gosh, this is a long one. Okay, here we go. Very good. Let's read it. He does mostly music and makes very low budget movies with his friends. A lot of his stuff seems kind of silly, but his philosophy is genuinely inspiring. One of the main things he talks about is when you get an idea that's like, wouldn't it be funny if, then you should bring that idea into reality. You can do it badly, you can do it silly, but it's not up to you whether it's good. You just put it out into the world and the people that'll like it will find it. This mostly manifests as a lot of short, not great songs about very specific topics. He's a real good time with it. Yes, I agree entirely. I will say, sometimes the impulse will be to make something short and silly, and sometimes you have to let that marinate longer. It's like cooking. Sometimes it needs to be quick and in the pan, like a good over easy egg. It's there, it's done. If you overcook it, it's a different food now. But sometimes you need to let something marinate longer than is comfortable for you. That's just the nature of the beast. Like if you push something out into the world before it's ready, you'll get, for me, the experience has been kind of like this, that would have been funny if, right? Like you want to really kind of pick up the thread and consider it for a while. One of my favorite horror creators of all time, pen name Soren Narnia, writer of Knife Point Horror. If you haven't listened to any Knife Point Horror, highly recommend it. The way that he writes is fascinating to me because what he will do is he'll have a story idea and he will think about that story until it becomes unbearable to continue thinking about it. And he knows it inside and out in his head. And then he'll sit down and write it in one go. And then that's pretty much on. He'll like fix it up a little bit from there, but just like it builds inside of him like a pressure cooker and then it's out. I can't do that. I get too scattered. I know that sometimes if I have a good idea, I need to get it on page right now or it will disappear on me. But different people have different creative processes. So figure out what works for you, right? Like figure out if you need to get something on the page right now or if you need to really stew in the implications. Like if you need to really crawl around in the mud for a while, like I recommend it. Corbin Castle asks, was Nick always intended to be a self-played character or did you decide on that later? It was really early on because you have to remember the seed of this show was me walking around the suburbs pretending to be scared by stuff. So we're not that far from the original seed. The main thing is that I'm now pretending to walk around as well as pretending to be scared of stuff. So yeah, Nick was always intended to be me. There were a couple of roles that I knew really quickly as I was working on other shows and I was getting to know other voice actors. Monica Mandeville was always going to be Nea DeRusso. Alex from Rogue Maker was the part of Sadie DeRosa was not written for Alex or as DeAngelis. But it was clear pretty quickly into Rogue Maker that she was like so good for it that it was like I knew that I wanted to ask her to play that part well before I had the courage to do so. And I'm really glad I did, because we have great energy together and I think we have like a real sibling energy, which is hard to find. Like you gotta bottle it. So it's like anything else in the creative process. Some people you find in the world and some people you have to really seek out. Our casting process was massive, of course. I'll also shout Kareem Crumfley or William Brewster, who I had also previously worked with as our Dracula on Redrac. The son bitch can just play a really good villain. I don't know what it is about him. When you put together a casting call, it's a smart idea to do a mix of monologues and dialogues because weirdly they're separate skills. And Kareem was one of the only people who auditioned for that part who managed to feel like in a good way. I mean this as a compliment, as kind of like a used car salesman. Like that feeling that the character wants something from you in both the monologue and the dialogue. That was the trick, is that there were some people that nailed it in the monologue and some people nailed it in the dialogue, but really Kareem was like so on fire with both. Lehman Kessler was kind of our other big pick. We went back and forth a lot on that. Lehman Kessler ended up in another fairly major part that is releasing very soon after this conversation. And he similarly, like, there are just actors who you can tell in the audition that they are tapped into something for themselves, and those people will fall into your pocket as well. Sorry for the wall of text. No, it was a great wall of text. I loved that wall of text. Thank you for putting that wall of text there. I agree with it, and it is always exciting to me to hear other people's creative processes. Yeah, we're nearing up on time here, folks. I'm going to take another hydration break. If people have more questions, feel free. If it's about a minute or so, maybe 30 seconds without any additional questions or comments or what have you, we'll go ahead and end the stream and wait for our next presenters. But this has been an absolute delight. If so, I'm going to hydrate and let you guys stew for a little bit longer. Last minute questions. Now's your chance. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I drank that like right next to the microphone. That's got to be horrendous. My bad. Chug, chug, chug. Yeah. I want you to know, chat, that I am drinking out of my favorite cup that I own. It is a mug in the shape of a skull. And you did not get to see this because my camera was not in the cards tonight, but I'm recording this from inside of a closet, which is also where all of the show was recorded. This closet is slightly larger than the closet that most of the show is recorded in, which means that I have enough room for a large skeleton from the Home Depot. His name is Bon Iver, which is a joke that my very funny wife made and stuck. And I'm surrounded by mostly fairy lights and old pillows and a giant Maryland flag. So that is, if you listen to the show and you hear me screaming and howling and crying and losing my ever loving mind, just imagine that I'm doing that in the world's gaudiest room. Okay, folks, last chance. I'm giving everyone like a solid 10 seconds to get um any last questions in. Yeah, let's go, Lauren. That's right. Yeah, actually shout outs to my wife, Lauren. She God, get you someone that can support you. Like it doesn't need to be a romantic partner. For me, it was very helpful to have a romantic partner, but um my wife is not a horror person. She really does not like horror. She can't really stand it. Um, but she has every step of the way respected that this is doing something really special for me. And I think that that is really important, is to surround yourself with people that respect what you're doing as well. That's kind of I'll leave you with that piece of advice, is that there is nothing more healing during the ups and downs of these process than having someone who is there with you emotionally, if not actually in the creative process. So I will leave you on that note. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. This was a lot of fun. Last plug for Shelterwood. Find us everywhere. That's Shelter Wood. Other shows that I'm on that you might like: Dracula, Dracula is a literary retelling of Dracula told chronologically. We'll be coming out with a Carmilla adaptation soon. You can find me as Tarsold Alone in Rogue Maker, which is an incredible show, and several other shows on the Bloody FM network. So thank you all so much for having me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this conference. There's a lot of really cool people here sharing their advice and their art, and I hope you can soak it all up.